Hey guys, welcome back to Reignited and our 392 Hemi powered C10 build. Now, as you can see, it actually looks like a truck again, which is quite a miracle. And the very first thing we're going to do in this video is reveal the wheels so I can get rid of this ridiculous blurred spot right there. So let's get straight into it. So ever since this project was started, these are the wheels and tires you've seen it rolling around on or just not moving, period. Now, these were never the wheels and tires I was actually going to use. These were just mock-up wheels. They had the correct bolt pattern on there. I personally think these are absolutely hideous, but they at least got the truck around. So what did we go with instead? Well, you see it right here. We've got some American Racing VN 510 wheels. Worked perfectly. We have American Racing VN 510 wheels in an 18-inch diameter. I didn't want to go too crazy with the rim size. Originally, I wanted to do 20s. Then I thought maybe I'd go more of a pro touring look with the 18s on there. I ended up going some Achilles 275 40 series tires. I actually really like the tread pattern on these tires. I think it's pretty cool. Remains to be seen what their actual performance is like. However, I do like the wheels and tires overall, but if I were to change one thing about it, if I went back to do it again, I would probably go with a larger sidewall on here. The lack of meats on here changes the look of the truck significantly compared to these rolling stock that I had on there. I think I would go with slightly more sidewall because these are actually 1.5 inches less in diameter, overall diameter, than my mock-up wheels and tires, even though the rim itself is 1 inch larger. So anyway, let's get these things on the truck and see how they look. So as I mentioned, I think it gives it much more of a pro touring type of a look. One of the things I like about it is that the wheels themselves with that pattern matches the steering wheel, kind of the same idea anyway. So yeah, I don't know, I'm not like overwhelmingly in love with them, but I still think the truck looks pretty good overall. So big changes from the last time you saw the truck here. Obviously I have the front end back on here and I've got the windshield in, I've got the back window in, all the trim is in. I have the door assembled here on the passenger side. Mostly, I still need to do the interior panel on there, but pretty much the door is reassembled on this side. Now, when it comes to the front end, you can see I'm still missing one light there on the bottom right. That'll show up a little bit later this week. And it doesn't look too bad on camera. I've got the new front bumper on there and it looks okay. Guys, this stuff fits like absolute garbage. I hate it. It's just cheap eBay repro stuff and it is horrible. Like I said, it looks decent on camera. Fitment is, oh my gosh. So I pretty much can't handle it. I still need to assemble the door here on the driver's side, get all the glass in over here, get the mirror on, and the mirrors are another great example of something that fits like absolute trash. I hate them and I will be replacing them. In fact, my goal is to actually get basically a donor C10 with factory original parts. Even if they're a little bit weathered, I'd still rather have those on here than these new parts that fit so horrifically. In fact, this core support here is a repro as well, and it also is garbage. I am really not happy with it. It is incredibly thin. The material is just janky as all get out. Man, I don't like it. I don't know if that's coming across clearly enough, but I really am not happy with the quality of some of these parts, but it's my fault for buying cheap, so that's what I get. Anyway though, the truck is really starting to come together now. Like I said, it's got a bit of that pro touring look with the new wheels and tires on there, and we're getting ever closer here. And I got a majority of the interior installed as well. I don't have the sill plates installed yet, but I have my seats in there. I've got the center console, a new carpet, got the seat belts in there. I still have the original red seat belts from the truck. I think it's actually kind of a funny little accent, so I'm gonna leave them like that for now. But yeah, the carpet actually fits pretty well for something that's been sitting in a box for years and years. Also, I got the shifter assembly in there. It's all cleaned up and painted. Obviously, we've got some wiring stuff still to do. I did in fact install a new steering wheel on there, so that's kind of cool. It's a bit new age for my taste, but I think it'll work. And it'll help with getting in and out of the truck because it's a smaller diameter than what the factory was. But overall, I think with the seats in there and the center console, the interior looks really nice. I'm really happy with the way it came out. So like I said, a lot of stuff done since the last time you saw it in the video, but I didn't film any of that because it's just boring reassembly stuff. Nobody really wants to watch me put a fender on and try to adjust it, and put a grill on and try to adjust that, and then yell and scream because the parts don't fit because they're just absolute garbage. Nobody wants to see that. So I just went ahead and assembled all of that. What we're going to do in this video is we're going to focus on the plumbing. I want to go ahead and finish up the cooling system, get the radiator hoses all plumbed in there and the coolant recovery tank all plumbed up, and also the power steering. I want to get the reservoir put in there, run the lines for all of that. We're going to make a special hose for our pressure hose. So that's what we're going to focus on in this video. Let's get into it. Now, it can be difficult to find upper and lower radiator hoses for something that's a custom application. We all know that when you go to a parts store, the very first thing they ask is what vehicle is it going in? That doesn't help us at all. What I find to be something that helps out in this situation is the first thing you do is you measure your inlets and your outlets. So in this case, I mean, you could use a tape measure, but you just saw me using a digital caliper right there. But basically measure your inlets and outlets and then draw a potential diagram of where that hose is going to go, and then add some measurements to it so you get some approximations. So basically what I'll do is I'll draw that diagram for both the upper and the lower radiator hose with my inlet and outlet sizes on there, and then I'll just go to a parts store and I'll look through their inventory and try to find some that I think are going to be close. Now, best option in this situation is to buy a few extra just in case. There's always going to be at least 3 or 4 that you think could work, maybe. Nothing's ever going to be perfect, but that's what I like to do is go ahead and get a few extra, that way you don't have to run back to the store 3 and 4 different times to buy those ones just to see if they're going to work. So buy 3 or 4 at a time, come home, test fit all of them, find which ones are going to work, and then return the ones that aren't going to work. That was what I did. I went to the store and bought quite a few extra just in case, and I think I found a couple that are going to work out really well. Let's take a look at what we got. So here we've got all of our components laid out for our episode today. You can see here's our upper and our lower radiator hose. Now look at this thing. How squiggly is this deal? Now I am going to modify this a little bit, take a little bit off the end here to suck it up a little bit closer to the radiator, but other than that, I think this is going to fit really well. Same with the lower radiator hose. I may take off just a little bit here on one end to make it fit a little bit better, but overall, not too shabby for a completely custom application. Now, I know that they do have those universal radiator hoses that will twist and bend in any direction, but I don't think they look very OEM. I don't love how they look. I think they look very hacked together, and the goal of this was to make it look more like the engine came like that from the factory. So if you can use some pre-molded hoses, that's definitely the best way to go about it. Now, we also have for the power steering here, this is for the reservoir return. We have a pre-molded hose for that. I have another power steering return line that comes from the gear itself. As far as the reservoir, this is a reservoir from a 2010 Dodge Challenger. The pump in there is the same Dodge power steering pump that they've used for the last 10 plus years in a variety of vehicles. It works well. I think it's going to be just right for what I need. Now, all I have to do for the reservoir is figure out a way to mount it to the core support, and then we're good to go with that. The exciting thing we're going to do here is we're going to make our own power steering pressure hose. Now I have some braided stainless power steering line here. It's rated for that sort of pressure. And then what I have is a couple of 6AN stainless steel weld-on style fittings that we're going to use to make our own hose. Now I'm going to use that in conjunction with the factory fitting that comes out of the power steering pump itself and the fitting that comes in the power steering gear. So we have all of that. We've got some various hose clamps we're going to need as well. Let's get straight into it. So I forgot the one thing I haven't shown you guys is this brand new radiator setup I got. I got this set up straight from Amazon. This is a 4-core aluminum radiator with a fan shroud and dual fans on it. Now I got this thing all as a kit, all as a unit, mainly because I actually wanted something that bolted in like factory. This thing fits right where the stock one goes. It's very sturdily held in place, and I think as a 4-core radiator, this thing's going to hold quite a bit of coolant, and it should not have any kind of overheating issues with this large engine in here. That is the hope anyway. This was something I did not feel like building myself or dealing with myself, so I just went ahead and bought a kit. Sometimes that's the best way to go about it. It's fun to build all your own stuff, but sometimes if you don't need to, just buy the part and move on. ourselves a favor and not install the hose with the plug still in there. The only thing I'm thinking here is that I may need to find another one of these little, you know, plastic shielding things to put around the low radiator hose, because it is touching the frame however slightly down here. I don't want it to rub through and eventually just cause for a coolant failure, because that would obviously be a big issue, especially on the track. So that's what I need to come up with. Get one of those little plastic shielding guys here. We'll slip that over that. But other than that, everything is in place, except for the fact that I don't love where the hose clamp is. I got to move the hose clamp. It's kind of on the bead rather than up higher than the bead. So move that hose clamp. Then our upper and lower radiator hoses are all set. Our first step in making a custom power steering hose is we're going to have to adapt our fittings on each end to mate with each other using those 6AN fittings. So here is the factory pressure feed line going into the power steering gearbox. I'm going to cut it about right here, clean up the end, and then weld this 6AN fitting directly to the end of that hose. That way it'll adapt to that 6AN line. Same thing on the pressure feed coming out of the pump itself. Here is the factory fitting here. I'm going to go ahead and cut it, weld the tube to the inside of the fitting, and then weld the 6AN fitting right to the end of that. That way this will screw into the pump, this will screw into the gear, and I just have to make a line that connects between the two of them. So there we go, got that fitting all cleaned up. It is ready to weld now. I went ahead and hit it with some brake cleaner and get rid of any contaminants before I weld on it. Now I want to point something out here real quick. I get a lot of comments from people all the time saying, hey, don't use brake cleaner on your parts before you weld them, because it could turn into phosgene gas, give you, brain trauma, death, all sorts of really horrible things. Guys, I get that, but I want to point out something real quick. Most of your commercial available brake cleaner these days is non-chlorinated, and non-chlorinated brake cleaner does not give phosgene gas when you weld on it. So definitely thank you for looking out, but I just want to make you guys aware that any sort of non-chlorinated brake cleaner, perfectly acceptable to use to clean up your parts before you weld them. Well, it's certainly not nearly as complicated as some of the other fabrication jobs we've done. So now we have our fitting set up here. We have our feed going into our power steering gear and our feed coming out of our pump itself, both of them to an AN fitting. So now we just need to loosely install these in their respective fittings, and then we'll make the hose that goes in between them. All right, as I mentioned, I'm going to loosely install the fittings here. All right, as you can see, it's a pretty short distance between the two right there. This hose is not going to be long at all. I have a 90-degree fitting that comes off of this one here, and then just a straight fitting for here. So honestly, this hose should only be about maybe 4 or 5 inches long. I don't really know if that's good or bad. I think it'll be just fine. So let's get this thing measured up and made. And these are the things that will bite you if you do not do your proper research. So I never actually pulled this hose out of the box. I just ordered it. I was like, that should work. And my AN fittings that I already have should work no problem. Totally not the case. This hose is a completely different diameter than the fuel hose that I used. Therefore, these fuel fittings will not work. I will need to get the actual PowerFlex fittings here for the AN line. So we will not be able to build our power steering line at this time. We'll hopefully do that a little bit later on in this episode when I get those fittings in. Instead, let's move on to the power steering reservoir and mounting that and running the various hoses for that instead. So continuing on with our plumbing of our various different hoses here, I went ahead and whipped up this mount for the power steering reservoir that actually mounts to the core support there. Put some riv nuts in there so that this thing will bolt directly to it. You can see it kind of stands off away from the core support a little bit and drops it down. That way you don't have any issues with hood clearance on there, but it's still high enough to serve as an effective reservoir. So I'm actually really happy with the way that came out. I think it puts it in a really nice spot. So that's the power steering reservoir mounted. Now on the other side of the core support, we have this. This is a stainless steel coolant overflow tank. I went with something a bit more blingy, just off the shelf that I could use to make this thing work. Now, I basically had to make up a couple of little brackets here to mount to the core support. Same thing, just put some riv nuts in there. So this thing mounts up as well. I'll get both of these things installed and show you what they look like. So we're able to get our power steering fittings in here for the actual power steering hose that I have. Now you can see here that the distance is extraordinarily short. Like I said, maybe 5-6 inches or so between the two. Have a 90-degree fitting here, a straight fitting here, straight out of the pump. So you can see that the plumbing for the pump itself is actually very simple. You have the one pressure hose going down to the gear, and then you have your return feed there into the pump itself, and then you have your return from the gear up to the reservoir. So very simple. We just need to finish making up this AN line here. So I just need to cut this thing here, put this 90-degree fitting on, and the whole power steering system should be done. Now this braided hose is a little bit different than the fuel hose I was using before because this is actual braided steel line. The fuel hose I was using was just kind of a braided nylon, so a little bit different fittings for that. These fittings actually come with the little olive, I believe that's what it's called, inside the fitting itself. It's got a little tapered fit to it that actually goes down inside because this hose being rated for much, much higher pressure does have the Teflon lining on the inside of it. So I'll show you the exact process for putting the fittings on these. So the first thing you're gonna wanna do here is go ahead and cut your hose to size, to the correct length that you want. Now, there's many different ways of doing this. You can look them up, but I prefer just wrapping a piece of tape. In this case, I'm just using painter's tape. I've seen people use electrical tape, whatever. Doesn't matter. Anyway, the best way you get the cleanest cut that you can. Now you can try using a hacksaw. That'd be a great choice. I'm just going to use a cutoff wheel because it is quick and easy. However, cutoff wheel is not always the best choice because it doesn't provide the smoothest or cleanest cut sometimes. And with this braided steel, you really want a nice clean cut. So I'm gonna try it with the cutoff wheel first. We'll see what kind of cut it gives us. All right, now right off the bat, I can tell that after I cut this thing that it actually spread the stainless steel braiding out a little bit. And while that is what we want to do, eventually we need to get the actual back portion of the fitting on first before that spreads out. So I'm gonna see if I can't close that back up enough to get this back portion on first. It really did spread that out quite a bit. I'll tell you what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna actually use some tape to try to tighten this up right now to get the fitting on, and then we'll go ahead and take the tape on afterwards. See, that worked like a champ. So I went ahead and just wrapped some electrical tape on there, tried to tighten up that stainless braid around the outside edge. Worked just well enough to get the back side of the fitting on first. That's what we want to do. So now we can take our tape back off of there. There we go. And again, like I said, we actually want that braiding to actually start spreading away from the Teflon inside there, because what you want to do is take your little olive here and get that wedged to where the Teflon portion is inside the olive and the braided portion is on the outside of the olive there. Now, I'll use a little hammer to tap it down in. There we go. Make sure that we've got that Teflon all the way up inside that olive there. That's what we're after. All right, that's looking pretty good. And then what we want to do is we want to go ahead and lube up the inside portion of this fitting here, because this fitting is going to slip down inside the Teflon, and then the outer portion is going to slide up and thread on to the lower portion here. And you want to make sure you have plenty of lube on there, because this really needs to slide down smoothly inside that Teflon portion. Just kind of spin it. Oh, you can see it just slipped right down inside. So now the fitting is fully seated into the olive portion here. And then now all we need to do is bring the rear portion of the fitting up and start threading it on here. Now what you want to do is that once you start threading this thing on, you want to make sure that it's not pushing the braiding back out while you're screwing it forward, because that would mean it's not getting a perfect seal here at the top. So we'll go ahead and basically put a little tape mark on there to let us know if the hose is trying to back out while we're tightening this fitting. But otherwise, that's gonna be it for this thing. I mean, you can see just how short this pressure fitting is. I like that, it's nice and simple. We don't have to worry about it too much being a short hose. Hopefully once we get this thing all together, it won't blow apart on us while we're 1,000 miles from home. All right, let's get this thing put together. There we have it, one ultra small, tiny pressure hose ready to go. Let's go ahead and get this thing threaded on. Very simple install there. We have the world's smallest power steering pressure hose all set up on there. Now the whole entire power steering system is plumbed. All those hoses are set up. We have our cooling system completely plumbed with our upper and lower radiator hose. I have currently just looped the coolant lines at the back of the engine because I am not running them into an internal heater core right now. Basically because I don't have anything in that HVAC system working at all. I have no box in there, I have no blower motor. I got nothing in there, so there's no need to run any coolant lines right now. So heater core lines are just looped at the back of the engine, but I do have the coolant overflow set up here as required by Rocky Mountain Race Week rules. Or is that NHRA rules? Either or, I have the coolant overflow tank all set up on here. So now cooling system's done, power steering's done. We're starting to work on our wiring here. We're getting very, very close on that. I think the last thing that we need to actually fabricate some parts for is running our intake system. So let me show you what I'm gonna do with that right now. All right, it's not sexy, but this is what I'm going to be using for an intake for the time being. I am going to fabricate a nicer intake later on. That's something a bit more stylish with just a nice round tube with an internal filter here. Should look really, really nice. However, in the meantime, I'm just going to go with this stock intake setup that came off the 2010 budget Challenger build. I was originally going to just throw this thing away, but I figured it'd come in handy for this, and guess what it did? Because it already has the nice mount here for the intake air temp sensor, and it actually fits halfway decently in here. I'm just gonna have to build a mount here for the front and one coming off the back on the splash guard there. But once I do that, I can use this factory intake with no problem at all. So that's our last bit of fabrication, and then it's just wiring. We'll try to fire this thing up. Well, the time has finally come for us to get involved into our wiring situation. You can see here, I have a mess of wires and everything. However, it is better than it looks because this is a preset kit from Holley. This is a Holley Terminator X Max, which means I can run my drive-by-wire throttle pedal on there. So most of this stuff will just plug in, but I will have to do some external wiring, and also I have to wire in my outputs for my fan relays and also fuel pump relay and all of that sort of stuff. So what I have here is actually a standalone relay and fuse kit. It comes with like 5 relays in here and I think 10 fuses. So this is actually a really cool waterproof kit. I like it a lot so far. It's been really straightforward. I like the build quality of it. If you guys want, I'll go ahead and leave a link in the description below for this thing. I paid full price for this thing, but it's pretty cheap, honestly, for what it is. And so I like this thing, very happy with that. Hopefully everything goes as well with the Holley Terminator kit. The only thing I may have to do here is I may have to build a bracket for these little coil drivers that come with the kit. I think it's kind of strange that they don't have anything integrated into the computer itself to run the coils. Kind of odd, but regardless, I'll make a little bracket for these so they'll sit right next to each other, probably on the firewall somewhere. Those will go in. So I have all this wiring here. I have my little gauge cluster here, which I don't know if this thing will actually just display gauge information. I certainly hope it will while it's running, but that's where I put it for right now. You can see my little autometer fuel gauge there. We'll get that thing hooked up as well. I have some battery cables here, and I have another external wiring harness, which I don't even know what this is for yet. Regardless, we got a lot to do, but the good news is, as soon as we get all of this stuff wired, we can try to fire the truck. That is our goal here, to actually get this thing fired up in this episode. Let's do it, guys. One of the things I was slightly disappointed about is that I bought this specifically for this project. This is a waterproof, kind of the auxiliary relay and fuse panel assembly. It's really neat, very well self-contained. It's wired nicely, very easy to understand what goes where. And I thought it'd be perfect for this application. I was really looking forward to putting this thing in. However, I did run into a small complication here. So it turns out that all of the relays in this box are activated through the high side, which means that you give 12 volt power to one side of the relay, the triggering side of the relay, and that will turn on the relay and you go on from there. However, the Holley Terminator X, just like almost every modern ECU, does their relay triggering through ground side, not through the power side. So unfortunately, Because of the way this thing is wired, there's no easy way to switch it over to where I can trigger them through the ground side. So I will not be able to use this, which I'm really bummed about. However, that being said, this is a really nice piece. I really like it a lot, especially for the relatively cheap price that it has. So I'm going to definitely hang on to this thing for a future project. I know I will use it at some point. I think it's great. It has all the mini relays in there with the mini fuses as well. Look at this thing. That's so cool. I like this thing a lot. It's really neat. So I'll be using that in some future time. Instead, I'll just be using your standard 12-volt relay here. Not quite as clean, not quite as pretty, but it's what I've got to work with. I'll go ahead and run a couple of inline fuses to it. Now, both of these relays, these are gonna be running to my auxiliary fans for the radiator. So we'll get those things wired up. Those are basically the only things I'm going to need a relay for on this vehicle. All the other stuff, I'm still using the factory relays. So we'll just need these for the fans. Now, the Holley Terminator X does come with an integrated relay for the fuel pump, so that's already in the wiring. Don't have to worry about that. I just need to go ahead and run that wire so I can actually trigger the fuel pump itself. So let's go ahead and get these relays installed and we'll move on. So we made quite a bit of progress here. We have everything plumbed here. I have the radiator filled with coolant. I have the power steering system all filled with some fluid. We will need to bleed that a little bit as time goes on. We have some fuel in the fuel tank. I have pretty much everything wired here. There's a couple of things that I want to clean up a little bit, but I want to make sure that it actually works first before I finish looming it all up. Now I have the intake installed currently. However, I did get the wrong intake air temp sensor because this is a different model than the one that the harness is made for, so I'll need to get a new sensor for that. Right now I just kind of have it rigged up so that it will still read okay for test starting purposes. And the intake is also not fully mounted, it's just sitting in there right now. None of that's important. What's important is that right now it is time to finally turn the key on this thing, set up the Terminator system, and actually try to start the vehicle. Now I have to say one thing about this Terminator whole kit that I got, the Holley Terminator, the wiring loom that comes with it is like OEM, really nice, and it actually tucks away pretty well. Everything clicks in nicely. I mean, it's really nice quality, very high quality. The only thing about it is that there is kind of a lot of bundle of wires at the back of the engine, so it's a little bit cluttered looking there. But honestly, it's a universal-ish type kit for a Hemi, so it has to have some sort of room for that sort of thing if you're using somewhat different applications. So I totally understand that. The wiring looks pretty nice overall. It does have the knock sensors on there, so knock sensors are plugged in, crank sensors plugged in. We have all the other wiring done. It is time to set up the system and turn the key on this thing. All right, so to go ahead and set this thing up, we just need to turn the key on and we should have this guy turn on with it. There we go, we are booted up okay. And I have already run through the process of setting up which engine I have in here. Because it is a Hemi and this kit was specifically for a Hemi, it was pretty straightforward. You just click through the dialog box on GCF Wizard, just like the instructions tell you. Very straightforward there. The one and only thing that kind of caught me off guard was that the very first thing this tells you when you turn it on is to do a TPS auto set. So I went ahead and went straight to the Wizard and tried to do a TPS set. It will not perform that TPS set until you tell it what kind of engine and drive-by-wire setup you're working with. So you have to go through the full setup procedure first, and then you can do a TPS auto set in there. But basically now we're all set. What I'm going to do is I have the fuel pump fuse disconnected for the moment. So I want to go ahead and crank the engine a little bit. You can look and see my oil pressure here. Let's go ahead and see if we can't get some oil pressure cranked up. All right, you can see there we are holding a steady of 28 PSI oil pressure. That's plenty good for me. I'm gonna go ahead and put the fuel pump fuse back in there and try to fire this thing up. Let's do it. Oh, I am nervous, no question about it. Here we go, you guys ready?